the idea, as the practice developed, the idea really was to try and work out how we could instantiate these processes, initiate them within communities in a way that meant that when we withdrew ourselves, in some sense, some of that processual, some of that process and practice could be embedded within that group of people surrounding a piece of infrastructure we developed, but always trying to understand the infrastructure and the buildings that we developed, not as the end point, but as the beginning point of an ongoing process of social and physical making. This is instantiated in a really literal way in this other early project, Black Horse Workshop, which takes an old industrial building and some local regeneration funding, and instead of spending it on something static like a shopfront renovation, which was very typical in London at the time, we invest in a workshop space where people can come and bring things and fix them, but around which a kind of social infrastructure and a community could gradually develop. So it has a cafe, it has a place to work, then it has also places for the other kind of work, which is perhaps often just at the level of an amateur DIYer, but which offers a knowledgeable community and a set of infrastructures that a knowledgeable DIYer couldn't normally access, financially supported by a community of permanent skilled makers. So one of the ideas that's very prevalent in our work and probably emerged 3 or 4 years ago is this idea of designed processes or designed outcomes as open systems. This is an idea which was first put forward to our knowledge by Richard Sennett, who's a great friend and mentor of ours. And the idea is that rather than designing closed systems in which all of the outcomes are already encoded in the object which is provided or the infrastructure that's provided, an open system is something which then can go on and generate further meanings, further uses, and perhaps even further infrastructure. So in which the meaning is not yet totally defined. So how do you start to think about a project in an open system? One of the things that we're interested in is the possibility of using the adventure playground as a model for the public space as an open system. They're quite extreme examples. They really demonstrate very vividly and very consistently this capacity to change according to the needs of their users and the communities that surround them. But the thing that's really special about them and really important is that actually interacting with them in a formative way that's not already been completely determined is absolutely integral to their life. And they prize the ongoing making of meaning over a kind of visual or aesthetic meaning which is captured at any one point. So they kind of eschew an idea about image making through architecture or even view making, and instead say these are spaces which are about relationship making, whether that's relationship between two people within a community of people or between a person and a set of objects and things. And at their best, they're really powerful places that help people that interact with them understand their own power in the world, struggle with what they can and can't do, struggle between their intentions and the way the world talks back to them. The other thing which I think is really critical and really important when we're talking about urbanism experimentation is this idea that the means produce the ends. All too often we take the kind of originally cynical analysis that the ends justify the means, which has now become, relatively normalized, and instead say the means produce the end. So what do we really mean by that? Well, quite often when we're presented with architecture projects, when we're presented with commissions, we're asked to work in a relatively formal way within traditional commercial structures in a very hierarchical way, but asked to produce much more radically social and communitarian projects. And basically it's not possible. The way you work generates the thing that you make. This is something that I think is really aptly and rapidly demonstrated by what's perhaps our most widely shared and reported project, which is the work in Granby in Liverpool. This is a suburb of Liverpool which has suffered from decades of top-down regeneration which at various times has condemned huge patches of then occupied housing and commercial areas. In this project, we wanted to create an ongoing process which could connect to a longer than 10 years campaign by the people that still lived in the area, who'd been very active doing painting, doing planting, doing organizing. And the question we had for ourselves was, how can we contribute design and architecture skills to this process in a way which allows it to go on past our intervention? And how can we participate in a process which is already established? And our answer was to temporarily move into the street, into a house that was made available by the funder of the project, to have a workshop in the backyard, which you can see there, to sleep upstairs, to have a small office. The front room is a site room. The back room is a community cafe run by a neighbor, and the basement's used as storage. And so it's understanding how you can work at the domestic scale to produce things at the domestic scale, which are somehow of and for the place in which they're in. Just some photographs to make it a bit more real. Building a yard in the back garden, and then designing and producing products for the houses with the materials that were available in the area, largely waste materials here, particularly scraps of brick from the internal demolition or houses that had collapsed, and making them into mantelpieces to put back in a sense of care and handmadeness and personal connection, which the communities established over decades had so in such abundance, and which had been so rapidly destroyed by the way that they were intervened with. So I like to think of these mantelpieces as a catalyst and as a prompt and as a gesture, which is using a profoundly social kind of material, or understanding material as profoundly social. The next idea I wanted to talk about is architecture as reordering. So it's kind of pushing on this idea of the social production and the social value of material. So rather than thinking of architecture primarily as a practice of drawing and modeling, thinking of architecture primarily as the practice of moving large quantities of material around the surface of the earth and giving them form and structure, but also limiting their future form and structure. So this is partly demonstrated, I think, in our projects, which are about making workspace, where we really challenge ourselves to do the most that we can with the least broader impact, with the least unnecessary infrastructure. So it's all about being loose and being really aware of the affectivity of every gesture that you make, every opportunity that you create physically. So this is a workspace that we designed, thinking partly about these principles, and its idea was to make the lowest value workspace possible so that it could be afforded by the widest group of people possible. And over time, this project has developed a community which has enabled it to expand as it moves sites, and a community of people who are making and working across a range of different disciplines and with a range of different skills. And by moving together and working together over long periods of time, the most robust and interesting thing now about these workspaces is not the kind of shell which they occupy, but the community which has been enabled within those shells, including our practice. So this is kind of, I guess, a refined or like a development of the idea that the means produce the ends. And this is that the process, rather than producing the project, the process is the project. So imagining the project starting at the moment that we become involved in a situation, in a context, rather than the moment that we hand the project on to a group of people. So probably the primary example of this is Baltic Street Adventure Playground, which Ricardo mentioned in the opening, which is a project which we initiated in 2013, which is now an independent charity which offers community food hub, which feeds about 300 families a week during the pandemic, is about to open Scotland's first publicly funded outdoor nursery, and has a free to access an outdoor play service which anyone can come to 5 days a week, where everyone is welcome and where food, warm clothing and supportive adults are always available to any child who arrives. I'll talk a little bit more about it later. Here's another example, which is the Material Institute, which is a collective space and school for textile making in New Orleans that my colleagues have been working on. And the idea is that they create an initial piece of infrastructure and then continue to be involved with its development over 10 years to come. And the final example of this really is Sugar House, which started as a means to an end, perhaps a place for us to work, but which has become a project in itself. So it's now a place where collaborations are generated, which then go on to make work. For example, we're currently working on a town square just down the road from our studios with 3 other tenants from our building. And the character of that project has been generated by the nature of our collaboration in the studios. And I guess the final thought is to think about buildings, think about infrastructure, and think about design, not in terms of what it is, but what it enables. So these are pictures of Cairn Street in Granby when we first went and met the neighbours in the community that were still living there. And one of the things that was under threat as we brought the streets back to life with more residents was this extraordinary informal community which had been created around planting the street. So the idea was to try and work out how you could intervene, how you could work in this place in a way which created new possibilities, but which enabled that existing culture to continue to grow and perhaps be strengthened. And the solution to this was to take on a building that was considered too derelict to be turned back into housing cost effectively and make it into a permanent home for the kind of planting that had happened on the street. Initially, it's a little sparse, but the basement's been dug out to allow earth for the roots of trees, and there's a studio there, which means that the Residents Association can invite people in from the outside, whether they're writers, whether they're makers, whether they're artists or any other kind of person, and have them resident on the street. So both the garden can continue to grow, but that enriching conversation can also continue to grow. And the last point really is to think about the city as constantly being made, and therefore meaningful work being a really important creation of anything that you design as a designer or an architect or as a social organizer. So really thinking about ways in which things that you specify, contractors that you collaborate with, constructors that you work with, how you can create design which creates meaningful work. We've obviously been highly influenced by the early arts and crafts tradition in this, but also finding ways to fit some of those ideals into more industrialized production processes, which make them more genuinely accessible, both as things to be employed by, to work in, but also making products that are more genuinely accessible to more people. Whether that's through projects which embed experimentation in their process, projects which open space for improvisation in the people that are making them, projects which retain the mark of the hand of the maker, which Granby Workshop in particular, whose project I'm showing here, are very, very interested in ceramic design, which has designed into it a level of chance and luck, which means that every product is different, but that you can make something very distinctive without a very, very high level of craftsmanship and skill. And the last project I want to talk about in terms of meaningful work is Baltic Street Plancher Playground. And that may feel like a bit of a leap because very little is being made here physically, and what is being made here physically is not a finely crafted object, but what I want to argue is actually the community itself is a finely crafted object, a finely crafted network, which it takes a great deal of skill and emotional energy and sensitivity to build and sustain. So it starts as you can see here, with a huge amount of really informal improvisation, and grows over time in the hands of volunteers, in the hands of the staff, to become a really thriving community which can welcome anyone in, and which provides really emotionally and socially sustaining work for the adults that are involved in it. And that in turn sustains and enriches the community of children that live with it and are growing up there. So we've got two final questions that we're trying to kind of find ways to ask ourselves as we enter into projects when we're thinking about physical interventions or social interventions, but always thinking of the future. And one of our prompts to ourselves is to say, how can we start not with an imagination of the future, which may or may not come to pass, but with a sharp and generous and critical eye on the present. So when you're thinking about the future, how do you first ask, what is our diagnosis of the present? When we think about the present, we need to think not only about what is and what isn't, what the problems are and how we address them, but also ask ourselves, as Bruno Latour asks us to, what is it that we're attached to? What is it that we want to protect and take with us? So I just wanted to end on this final image, which maybe takes a bit of explaining, but this was an image that was made for a radio show that me and my colleague made back in 2019, and it's John Ruskin trying to put together a piece of IKEA furniture. And it's really interesting to me because it's kind of talking about how we look at the past without nostalgia, how we learn to take things that seem valuable within it into our present, and how we can make the kind of making that we find so valuable in our projects open to more people. How can we exceed the possibilities of the present? How can we create generative possibilities to take with us? And IKEA in some ways exemplifies a kind of ambition for high quality for everyone, but it also in other ways, well, in some ways it also creates this possibility to be really involved in making your own environment, but in other ways it delimits, it creates an implicit perimeter of what's possible. And we're really interested in how we can take the ambitions of someone like Ruskin up against the ambitions of a group like IKEA, and think forward to how we work into the present. Okay, I think that's me. I'm maybe slightly over time. Apologies if I am.
Oh, good. Thank you very much, Amica. I think this was a great trip through many of the projects you did with Assemble, and also I think with the terms you mentioned, the open systems and experimentation, and also a possible direction for architecture and urban design in the future. It's exactly what we also discuss with the students. And yeah, I think it's a good moment to now give the word to Lucio, and then to try to bring both of your perspectives together at late after that.
Thank you very much, Ricarda. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. And most of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak about this project. That is maybe the one I love the best among the things I did in the last years. I apologize for my English. It is a little bit rusty after so many years in Germany, but I will do my best. So Schwarzwurzel, maybe I can tell you later the meaning of this title for the project. I found today a beautiful translation in English, Viper's Grass. Viper's Grass is a beautiful name. And 2010, 2015 does not mean that the project is dead. Actually, it's still living, but with such difficulties that I cannot speak about this time after 2015. And in these 5 years, we, when I say we, I mean for the first 2 years, Caroline Leipold, Tobias Kurz, we will see them later, and me, and myself. And after 2012, the Cultural Association Schwarzwurzel. And very important topic maybe later for the discussion is the difference between a cultural project, which we didn't do, and a socio-cultural project, how it is called in German bureaucracy. It's very important to get money to realize projects like this. What we did in these 5 years was very, very different. A lot of projects, maybe 50 different projects. Most of them are made through cooperations with schools, with other associations, with artists we invited in this little city of Steinach, with universities. But all of them were made with the inhabitants of the city. All of them were participation projects, open for everybody. What it means is also very interesting questions, and I think we will speak about that later. But as I hope I understood it well, I will speak only about one of our projects. It is the core of our project, and our theater ensemble. And this is a short story how it all began in the year 2010 until the highlight of our little group 2012. Nobody knows where Steinach is and what Steinach is. This is this little city, and at the edge of the Thüringer Wald, the forest of Thuringia, near the border to Bavaria. That means near the border between East and West Germany. That's very important for the history of this little city. And Steinach was founded about 600 years ago because of slate, this particular stone, Schiefer in German, slate, which is plenty of slate there. All mountains are made of this particular black stone, and that particular stone in Steinach is not good enough for buildings, but is perfect to produce. You see these pencils. Yeah? This is our slate pencil that everybody in the world used. Maybe also your grandparents. Surely your grandparents. And Steinach had this monopoly of the production of these particular pencils. The last cargo left 1968 to Indonesia. And since that year, the production of pencil slates stopped. And the city began to disappear. It means that 1989, the two Germanies were united. There were maybe 15,000 inhabitants. And last year, 2020, there were a little bit more than 3,000. So disappearing is the right word for that, for this phenomenon. This is the city, how you can imagine that it looks like, black. Yeah? Black, these slates are everywhere. And there is a little effort to improve the tourist device, the tourist infrastructure, particularly for winter sports. So there are lots of rich people in North Bavaria that would like to spend their weekend in Steinach, skiing, but it does not work very well. And so it's sad history, but the city continues to disappear. Here 2 or 3 pictures of it. The feeling you have when you are there is a feeling of emptiness. It's the emptiness not only as physical phenomenon, but an emptiness coming from the inside. Emptiness, which is also it causes the impossibility of movement, and immobility, which is not only an immobility because you have nowhere you can go to, but it's a spiritual immobility, a cultural immobility. This is this feeling is so strong that you can also imagine that this picture you see now are something like a ghost of the city as it will be in future. And I think that this is the big problem of all people living there. Each movement is a movement toward this ghost, the ghost of total emptiness. Yes, this is one of the biggest problems in Steinach. You can imagine what it means for young people living there. No chance for future, no chance work, unemployment, but also not to forget, you read it in the press, I think, how difficult it is, the question of neo-Nazi milieu in south of Thuringia is very, very important phenomenon. And so this picture is, in my eyes, I hear something, in my eyes, a symbol of Steinach. First look, beautiful. Second look, well, the house a little bit damaged. And if you know a little bit more, you know that this was the dream of atomic nuclear autocracy of the GDR. So somebody found within the iron and the slate also something like uranium, and they thought they could have a future in atomic nuclear age. But it was a failure, and was left behind is radioactivity. So it's impossible to step into the water there. And this is a little bit the symbol of this region. It's beautiful and horrible at the same time. We went there, why I will explain maybe later. 2010, Caroline Leipold, Tobias Kurz, and I, with this intention, we occupied this fabric building. It was a production of Christmas decorations. And we organized a first workshop, trying to invite back to Steinach young people who left, looking for a better life somewhere else, to come back and to work with the people who remained in this city on one topic. And the topic was work. Work was the reason why the city was founded 600 years ago. And work is the reason why the city is now disappearing. There's no work. Everybody has something to say about that. And we organized workshops for kids, and cinema in the evening in our spaces, and dining for everybody who had wanted to join us. And of course, there was an exhibition after 10 days of intense work. And at the end of this first workshop, 2010, all participants asked us, you have to repeat it next year. Come again, do it again. But we said with a new idea, maybe. And then I thought about the project we did in this first summer, and there were two works that they were very, very interesting. The first one, this is a pavilion we built with the recycling materials we found in the waste depot outside the city. We collected everything, then we built our pavilion. And this guy here, you see Kevin, he wrote an announcement for the local paper, inviting all people bringing glasses with something inside, and tell the story of these glasses, why it was made, who did it, why that was not eaten. So history of their family through the history of these products, because these products are, in his eyes, the symbol of Heimat. When, I don't know, in English, there is no translation of this word, I think, in any other language. When he left the city, each time he went back, grandpa gave him a bottle of something. And that was his Heimat in the suitcase. And then, like a policeman, he wrote the histories on the marketplace of all these glasses. In the same time, I went with Otto Eichhorn. He's an old man and historian of the city, in the forest, looking for the mines where the slate, where the stones was taken. And he told me this history that the children went each time to bring lunch to their parents working in the mines. And when they came back through the woods, they took something at home. For example, something to eat for the goat. Each family had a goat at that time. Something for heating. And in summer, berries to eat. And it was summer, and when I came back to the city, I collected beautiful blueberries, and I produced marmalade, which I exchanged on the market, on Saturday market day. I exchanged these glasses with histories. So we, Kevin and I, we collected an anthology of little histories on this city. And then that was the idea. If we do again a workshop like that, 2010, the year after, then it will be a project with these histories. And I thought the people themselves who told us this history had to write something and then bring it on stage. But I didn't know if it was possible. So I spoke with two friends. The first is Beata, coming from Budapest, living at the time in Berlin. She's a director, theater director, working with children and social programs with theater. And Matthias, he has a very good working theater for young people and children. And I asked them, is it possible to organize a workshop 3 weeks with persons who had never been on stage and write a play and then bring it on stage? And they said both, yes, it's possible, and I will do that. And so we had two directors, and we began to look for money first. And my friends began to visit schools and associations and so on. And at the end, we had, after a few months, 25 people from 10 to 65. 25, 26 people ready to write and to act and go on stage. And that was the birth of the Volkstheater Schwarze Wurzel. it was very interesting that first year, 2011. The pièce de théâtre, the play they wrote, was about 3 hours long. It was like a review on the city life and city experience, what it means to be there, what it means to be there in 10 years, what about the future, what about the past. It was very, very impressive what they wrote in that short time. And it was played in the empty railway station, and then we moved in an empty, beautiful, abandoned building. And then in our main stage, the abandoned public library. Everything was empty. Everything was empty. That was our main stage, so that the public moved from one stage to the next, and the city itself, it became our stage. So the theater was in the city, the theater of life, so Baroque a little bit, yeah, but that was. And this project was awarded many times, and it was the beginning of very beautiful history. And we understood at the time that theater has this particular power that can reach everybody. You can participate in a theater project on stage, behind the stage, and in front of the stage as public. And most of all, we recognized that theater had a particular tradition in this part of Germany, maybe in all Germany, but particularly in the eastern part of Germany. The tradition was cultivated all the time, and everybody there had was ready to participate. Theater was exactly the common language that could bring everybody together to work to a common project. And it was year after year until 2015, little sad the story at the end, but for the first time, 2013, we had a real theater. This was, sorry for the pictures, not very good. This building, this is a storehouse near the railway line, which was condemned to be demolished the same year. And so the city, it was a gift for us. Yeah, you can take the building, do what you want for 5 months. And so we transformed it in a theater. We worked hard. All people, actors, everybody who wanted came and worked to transform this hall in our theater. And it was 5 months, the biggest theater in southern Thuringia. And then it was demolished, and it was like a funeral in the city, because they understood what they had. All this empty building lying there waiting for nothing, ghosts of a possible future. And there were a beautiful summer in this building. And the last theater we had, the last building, was this abandoned, it was 1980s discotheque. And that was our last step in this project. So one important thing about theater as means, yes, it's artistic mean to gather people. I have already said that it's a common language that everybody could understand. And for me personally, it was a great history, because let's say 2-3 young people living there, they could understand that that was what they wanted to do. And 2 of them, they are studying acting now in Leipzig. Another is, sadly, was director working in theater as therapy, but she passed away 2 years ago, very young. She very sad history. And each time I presented this project in many different occasions, at the end came one question, and I repeat this question now without comment, and maybe it's interesting for you, and maybe is good input for the discussion, and also for your study, if you are going to work with little cities like this outside, yeah? More than outside, in somewhere in nowhere, would I say. And the question was that, isn't maybe this kind of projects in such a dying cities are different from euthanasia? Euthanasia is Sterbehilfe. Sterbehilfe. Is it different from that? That was the question. And I had an answer, but I don't say it now. Maybe if you want, we can discuss about this. And this is a short presentation of this part of our work. If you want, I can show you 2 little projects we did in the meantime, but very, very shortly, but I don't want to take time away from the discussion. If you want, I can show you them later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucio. I would say we maybe start with the discussion, and then if at some point it makes sense, we can go back to look at the other parts, if it's fine for you. And I think it was great that you both ended up with a question, and also I think Lucio already connected quite well to the questions Amica posed, asking for a diagnosis of the present and what are we attached to, and to then really dive into this project in Steinach and understand what it really means also to create this social and cultural, or how did you say? Yeah, social and cultural project, which I think you both work with, and how experimentation and engagement in this really create also possibilities. But yes, maybe I give the stage to the students who prepared questions for you. And yes.
I will start. So we want to thank you for your lectures. They were very interesting to see and also to remember. So I want to ask, first of all, Amica Dall. As we know, and so in your lecture, you have done a lot on reusing public spaces in cooperation with experts, normal people, or even kids. Did you think that the pandemic has changed your strategy and work method of the film by the way of acting, thinking, or even writing about reusing public spaces? And how are you adapting with these changes?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, am I still on mute? No, I think it's a really great question. And the truth is, what the pandemic has done is not changed our work so much as halted a particular and very important strand of it. Some of the more social aspects of larger projects are able to continue, but obviously the work which is more open and dialogic and improvisatory simply not been possible. Particularly in terms of our work with children and families. At the moment, we have a project which we're trying to get off the ground, which is to place some of the play workers that exist within our practice into empty shops in high streets and town centres with a kit of loose and recyclable parts. to create that kind of atmosphere of permission to dwell, something to do which doesn't cost money, a safe way of occupying public space. And yeah, just to provide free and open play on streets and public spaces as a way of just starting to think through how we can start to reconnect, but also to really just spend time outside, talking to people and really understanding from their perspective what's happened over the past year and how their ideas and relationships with public space have changed. And we think particularly for children, younger children in particular, whose a lot of their experience has been made up during this time in which cities have basically shared spaces, and cities have either not been accessible or been accessible through a kind of a mist of apprehension or fear. There's an opportunity there to re-establish a relationship or to aid the re-establishment of a relationship in a way that's really positive. Different projects have reacted differently during the pandemic. So Baltic Street, for example, has pretty much changed in its entirety from a children's project to a food project. So it's nearly all the play workers have been employed throughout the pandemic, sorting and receiving food donations and distributing them throughout the communities. And that's really just a testament to the robustness of the network that they've built up there and their relationships. But other projects like the work in Liverpool has more necessarily been paused because it's more indoors or has a different character. So it's our experience of the pandemic is probably as various as all of your experiences. But yeah, I definitely think that re-establishing social uses of public spaces and high streets above re-establishing commercial uses is a really important thing at the moment.
Yeah, the next question is quite similar, but directed to Lucio Nardi. You have worked with initiatives to reshape public spaces, and as you presented, you have also worked on the conversion of existing buildings to cultural spaces. And we wanted to ask you as well how COVID-19 influenced your consideration and approach of your future work considering public and cultural spaces.
In Kürze erreichen wir Hammer. Ausstieg.
That's great. Beautiful. So I'm not sure I really understood the question. As a public space and culture. Can you say the last part? Yeah.
The question was how the pandemic influenced your consideration and approach of your work when it comes to the conversion of existing buildings to cultural spaces, and also your work in public spaces.
So with the pandemic, so I can tell you one history. Last year, I worked in a similar project in Rudolstadt. It was a park. Rudolstadt is also in Thuringia, and it was a big quarter made of these big buildings, you know, Plattenbauten, and it's also going empty because the big fabric has closed. And so everybody's going away, and all buildings that are now empty, they are demolished, and all the people came together and they said, we want a park. And so I organized this thing, and it ended during the pandemic. Last year, September 2020, we made a great happening there, and it was a beautiful thing. And so in my thought, of course, it's important thing, everything what's happening right now, but I don't think that it will change much for the next years. If I look at cities like Steinach, I can say pandemic was before, pandemic is now, pandemic will be after pandemic. this situation is so desperate there that I think that many people were desperate because many friends of mine, they work with older people, very old people, and there are a lot of them that died on COVID, and that's the grief is what is coming more for these little cities. Grief coming over desperation, which is already there. Yeah? So that's for the future, that will be a relief, but I think that it will be my opinion. Steinach is no more a city. I think there is a new regulation in Germany. Under 4,000, you lose the name city. So they have to be integrated in a bigger one, which is Sonneberg. And so they are no more a city. So what do you do there? Huh? What do you do there? And so next question maybe, but in relation to this project, pandemic is a little accident on the way to disappearing.
Thank you, that was quite interesting. Now we would come to a slightly different topic, more about your work. So Lucio Nardi, you worked mostly interdisciplinary yourself and expand your work upon your profession, whereas you, Amica Dall, concentrate on your interdisciplinary projects to work with other professionals on tasks and designs. So our question is, how flexible do you need to be in your own profession to have a successful outcome of the work? And then furthermore, is common ground, like professions out of one field, for example, careers within the creative or design field, does that make the process more restricting or enriching, or is it maybe necessary to find easier solutions in the work?
Would you like to answer, Amica, or shall I say something?
No, go ahead. I was just to check, your question is around whether the interdisciplinary nature of architecture makes it easier or harder to build wider disciplinary and interdisciplinary connections. Is that the question?
Kind of, and also, is it like for your own personal work, do you need to be kind of extra flexible, more flexible in your work in your own profession? And then is it easier to work with people from a similar field? Is it easier for you to work with architects or with designers than it is to work with mathematicians or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it's much easier and more fluid and often more enriching to work with people from other fields. And that's because there's a really clear basis for collaboration and conversation and exploration and discovering what the parallels or links between the different problems that you approach and how you think about them. And very often you can discover real correspondences in some of the bigger questions that you're asking between disciplines. And I'd say the majority of my collaborations are with people in a much wider field. However, also architects and engineers and designers, which have very different capacities to the ones that I have or my practice have, also there's been a huge amount of learning and collaboration. I think working with people who are very similar to you, it's very important to be in a very fluid and loose relationship, which is more about working together in order to enter a conversation with someone else. But certainly once you've been engaged in architecture long enough and delivered some built objects, you like the key skill you have to learn through that process is how to have meaningful conversations with people who do different things to you in order to assemble all the things you need to assemble for a building. And so really it's a kind of a natural extension then, I would say, to just work out how to work in bigger teams, have wider conversations. Yeah, that helps.
Thank you for the question. Is for me very important. I can say that I learned really a lot from these projects I did in Steinach. And the reason is that what I said very shortly during the presentation, this difference between cultural project and socio-cultural project. The second one are free from a purpose. So important is not what you can reach. That has not to be beautiful, has not to be good, but has to be. There was very interesting in Amica's presentation before, the way you work makes the result. Is that right, my quote? And that is the most important thing, the way you do that. And if you want a participation project, then you have to disappear as, for example, architects. When we worked for the pavilion, for the theater, for everything we did, I only made proposals, but the work was made by all other, and I was not there. I was only controlling that everything was not dangerous, that everything was not important. Is it beautiful, is not beautiful, no matter. Is it a good thing, is not, no matter. Matter is, how can I change my way of working? How can I change my project in a way that everybody could participate following their own potential? If you make a theater, a piece of theater, you don't have on stage Leonardo DiCaprio. No? You have this little girl, this guy, this, and so what you have is not good. No? It's not good, but what the director did, and that was great, the two directors, they came, they understood everybody who was working with them, and they found the right thing for everybody. And that is the same thing you have to do as architect. When I realized this park last year, so I only controlled that Bauaufsicht and every bureaucracy, it was okay. Of course, I said, that's maybe we do this, but they did it. Yeah? And you have to disappear. And this is also the best way you can work with other disciplines, for example, with artists or with sociologists. I don't know if that's correct. It must be clear from the beginning what is your work and what is important. If that thing is clear, then you work beautifully. But one word you said, the flexibility, that's very, very important.
I think you maybe answered part of the next question right now as well. It was, how does the communication and design process changes while working with other professions or groups compared to working with architects or designers? And especially, for example, working on projects that involves the residents of the place or kids, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I find it quite confusing that I get this question a lot, like, how do you communicate or talk with the people that you know you engage with? And I think the answer is that I don't engage with them or consult them. We just, you know, we talk, and we spend enough time in a place that you can talk and have a conversation, and I think like demystifying that process is really important. And it's actually really difficult, I think, to step outside of your professional role and arrive in a place as yourself, because a lot of your training has been tracking you in the other direction. But ultimately, that, to me, that's all it takes. And working with children in particular, sometimes it's important to spend a bit of time remembering yourself as a child. But yeah, I don't think that it requires any skills which are not skills that are native to just, you know, humans' normal sociality. If anything, it's about just undoing some of the work or the experience which is taking you away from that. Obviously, there are conversations you can have with architects, with engineers, with contractors, which are different to the ones you have with people. But I think one of the things is the skill of learning who to have what conversation with. And it's easy to mistake the skill of the kind of practice of just getting to know someone, understanding their life experience and where they're coming from, and taking on board their ideas and concerns, to thinking that they should be answering design questions, which is wrong. You know, that's your skill that you're bringing into the conversation. It doesn't mean that perhaps you shouldn't be very deeply and formatively informed by your conversations, but if you talk to people in ways which are appropriate to their experience and your experience, and meet them as equals, basically, you're equal but different, there's parity but not equivalence, you can have a conversation. And the more you're struggling to work out how to communicate something or ask a question, the more it is a sign that you maybe need to just roll back a bit, and find a more direct and straightforward way of relating, or in fact potentially redirect your question or query. Yeah.
If you want, I can show you two projects. There are 5 slides made, 2 projects with children. And I learned one thing working with them. I made like the 6 projects in Steinach and Sonneberg. And what I learned is that you have a meeting with a group of children or young people, maybe half an hour, but, and I learned after 2 or 3 times, you have maximum 15 seconds where you have all of them concentrate on you. And you have find this 15 seconds to say everything that's important. And when they got it, then they do everything, but no more than 15 seconds. I show you very, very shortly this project. The first is in Sonneberg. This is, they are children coming from, I don't know the word of English, so Migrationshintergrund, these complicated German words. There is a big house where they are living there, and the thing that they have to draw their self-portrait, and we made Drachen. What's the name in English? And sorry,
kites.
Yeah, that's right. And that was a fantastic project we did with them. That was one of the most beautiful projects we did in Steinach with the children. And the second one is in a school. And here was one of the most beautiful picture ever in our project. The Tag an dem ich, everybody could choose what day in their life, and 2 of them, they decided the day I was a Bollywood star. And then there was a movie, they made a movie in this city, and this picture is, to me, fantastic, because there is still a Leninstrasse there. And then for one afternoon, this rainy, gray day, there was this young girl running through the city. And so only this. Sorry, I wanted to show this because it's too beautiful, this picture for me.
Yeah, thank you for this picture. My question may be addressed to both of you, but mainly you, Lucio Nardi. I want to ask you, did this project in this small city and you worked with the citizens? Yeah, the first part is how you got them to work with you, and the other part is, does it change something in the terms, in long term for the city, or was it just a brief ray of hope or something? So does how little changes can change something in long term or not? What do you think about it?
So how I get the people working is very easy. Working. I went there with Caroline and Tobias, and then we began to build the pavilion. So we went, and with our hands, we began to do things. And then somebody came, what are you doing? And then when we finished it, we built up our dining room. And each evening we ate there, inviting everybody. We cooked for, and then one came, the second came, and evening after, 5 friends came and they were there and we spoke about things. So by working and be open, we were always on the marketplace, working or sitting or eating, somebody playing music, and then slowly. The second part is very difficult for people who work with us. Was very difficult because after the project, after the workshop, I came back to Berlin, I went to Italy, I did something, but they remained there. And to do something, this little city, to expose yourself, it's very difficult in a city where nothing happens. And from one day to the next, you are on stage. And these things they said on stage, they were heavy things, very heavy, very critical to everything was happening in the city, the politics, the environment, the past, the communist parties, the neo-Nazi coming in, very hard. But these people still live there. And it was hard, very hard. And we were not loved in the city. There were 2 parties, and many people wanted that when we came, they began, it was not dangerous, but almost, very, very near. But for us was easier because we could go away, but somebody remained there. And the second, the last part of your question is about Sterbehilfe, euthanasia. What does it mean, a project like this? A project can move a lot in each person. So I think that everybody that worked with us, it was a big enrichment for them as it was for me or for us. And for them, it changed something. The young people going away, working or studying in big cities, they know what they did. And they thought once, at least, about these topics. But for the whole city, for the community, it depends on the pandemic, for example. Pandemic, I think it's difficult to begin again after that. You cannot control that. It can be good, not, you don't know. But the most important thing you can reach is that you save one person, and that's what's happened, surely.
I believe I really, what Lucio said has a lot of resonance and a lot of beauty. Coming from potentially a tradition which has a kind of pragmatism which is sometimes really heavy and draining, but sometimes a very strong and useful force. I think that when you go into a context, a situation, a community, you take on a very strong responsibility. When you ask effort from people, you have a responsibility to basically make sure that in some way that effort is rewarded, returned, and grows, or that you create infrastructure that enables it to grow. Because the imagination that things might change, the kind of hopeful imagination, can be a very sparse commodity, not least because it's very easily kind of drowned among the weight of day-to-day worries, but also boredom, and also the experience of putting effort in and things not changing. So I think you're taking a very serious responsibility to the people that you ask to get involved, that in some way it's both rewarding or useful for them in the moment, but also that that you think very hard and carefully about how what you do might be sustained, or the way it relates to time. Now that might be being very, very clear that it's ephemeral, that it's about a momentary spectacle or celebration or exploration, but otherwise being very certain, and or at least kind of strategic in yourself, of understanding what kind of social infrastructure, what kind of organizational infrastructure might do justice or support these things in the long term. And yeah, I think if you do that, you can make a very profound and lasting difference by bringing not much more than an organizational capacity and a sense of the possible, right? But it takes a lot of time, and the difficulty is acquiring or finding the support for that time. I would say the process in Baltic Street it's taken 5 years for it to now be something which supports and grows itself. And yeah, that's a very serious commitment to a place, to go into it knowing that you've got kind of 5 years of committed emotional and practical work to do. It's very difficult to get the practical support, but also the economic support to do that. But I really think that is the only useful way to build the kind of small scale change which can actually support itself and grow into larger scale change. I don't really believe anymore that it's possible to do that using more top-down or faster methods. I just don't think you can. But yeah, I think in terms of how you get people to work with you, I think it's a bit more of a question to turn the question on its head, which is to say, what can I do that is useful for these people, right? So it's not about necessarily being a service provider, but turning the question on its head and not putting the elaboration of your project ahead of listening and responding initially. And there's a very delicate balance between bringing something new, because without something new, nothing changes, and responding and listening. And reacting to immediate need whilst imagining things that are not reactive but propositional. Yeah, and I think that is the kind of skill and imaginative capacity that is required. But yeah, it's no easy ask. And I think a lot of damage has been done in the UK by people undertaking apparently social or engagement projects kind of frivolously, or without an understanding of what might actually turn them into sustained change. And actually all you do is, ultimately you can sometimes make a shard, make something beautiful, but quite often what you do is wear people out or make them more cynical. So yeah, you either have the route of making something very beautiful which sits with people long enough that they take it on their journey with them, like what Lucio describes, or going in a way which is maybe more modest, maybe more practically minded, maybe more heavy booted, but which is focused on infrastructure rather than outcome. And sometimes that method lacks the beauty that's required to light the fires, the way Lucio describes. But also, depending on the context, sometimes that's really the only way. And I think
I
The
think
thing that you would aspire for is to be able to do both, right? That's what you would really aspire to. Yeah.
And I think you already touched like a topic like responsibility and skills of us as designers and architects. And I think also if we bring it more to the spatial sense, what I question myself often is like, how do we actually make what we as architects and designers, let's say, see in the spatial existing parts? I mean, we make visions of it, we imagine stuff when we see it somehow, sometimes. How can we make this social or cultural capacity that we see, or the value that we see in the existing material space, more into I don't know, let's say the public, or how can we make it more visible in connection to trying to create new communities, like really the spatial aspect of it, of what you do and what you did in the projects.
Is that for me or Lucio? Lucio, do you want to answer first? Long time.
Can you say 2 words about your question? Two main words that I can.
I feel like, for example, when you showed the images of Steinach and mentioned Ghost City and yeah, what maybe happens to it in future, maybe some designers and architects would go through the city and already see many possibilities, but maybe just come there for some little project or imagine a lot and not be able to communicate it to people. And the question goes a little bit in direction of how are we able to do much more of these kind of experimentation or projects. And
so I think that you can be architect or designer in so many different ways. So there are many colleagues I know, they would never do something like this, what I did, never. They are not made for that. And I think they are made when somebody goes to them and says, so this is our property, please build a house or a big house or a skyscraper, then they do that, no problem. But this is completely different point of view. And you have this point of view in yourself. And then it's no matter if you are architect or artist or cook or a farmer, I don't know what, or you don't have this point of view. So and that's the only thing. You have to go there and be open, yeah? Be completely open, without prejudice and without a solution. Without a solution. If your purpose is to go there to work with people, but yeah, that's the only thing. I think that the occasions, okay, is this or that.
But in both projects, I think there are many, or in both ways of working, there are many connections already to the material, no, and to how can you use it, how can you invent stuff.
There is I don't know. I don't want to talk too much. Maybe Amica wants to say something. I can report it.
I would say that the really critical thing is the way that physical infrastructure both can leave and embody a social process, and the way that it can catalyze or initiate further processes by staying. And I think there's a real thing about the way that physical infrastructure can really embody the care that's gone into a wider process. I don't think you need to think about the two things separately. I think that there's a set of processes that can move in different directions and have different outcomes. sometimes leaving something very physical is very powerful because it feels like life and change is accumulating, rather than you put effort in and then it kind of just disperses. So yeah, I think the physical and the designed objects incredibly important part of the work, and it not only leaves a trace of it, but often if you do it well, it can kind of prompt other things to happen. Yeah, and it's just so important that you leave things which communicate the care, and that people who live in that environment are worth the hard work of making something beautiful or useful for them to live among. And often the way that local authorities manage less well-off or more peripheral neighborhoods has the opposite message. So you have a responsibility, I think, to really counter that in the way that you create new material culture.
Thank you.
I can report a discussion very shortly I had with the main what's in English, the Denkmalpfleger. How could you say that? Somebody who cares for
Heritage.
Traditional buildings are made of in traditions and so on. So you have seen all these buildings covered of slate. They are black and so on. And he asked me, you are architect, why in this project here in Stanley you don't work with this traditional architecture like slate and all these materials? And once I spoke with somebody who was building his house, and he showed me the receipt for the facade, and it was Spanish slate. And so I thought about old slate lying in the mountains right there. But it was cheaper to buy slate from Spain, not cheaper from Russia, but it's blue and not black. So it's not possible. And so I asked him, what kind of tradition is this if you build something that looks like the traditional architecture in Thuringia, but it's made with materials that are in Spain. And for me, tradition is made by physical working. Exactly that's what people do with the material they have there. And if it's impossible to work with slate right now, but it is possible to work with other material. And somebody who goes to Obi, for example, and buys very cheap materials, but he goes at home and he does something which he means is useful for me and maybe also for my community, then he does something more for the tradition than somebody who buys slate in Spain to build the house looking like the other houses there. So we can, you can discuss about that, but it's a very interesting discussion.
Yeah, I would also maybe open the stage for if somebody else has a question to one of the speakers or in general to make. No more. Yes, I don't know. Did you discover something else in the work of the other that you would like to expand on, or something that remains open that you would like to address as a question?
I mean, I would just say very quickly that although I definitely can connect to and understand the sadness, I guess, which is in some of the way you talk about the project, for me, my reading of it is to imagine that shards of that feeling are carried by everyone that was involved, right? You don't have to have changed your life in an external way to have changed it internally. yeah, and I think it's certainly possible to continue to talk about a project like that, which hasn't been able to continue with hope, you know, and optimism. So yeah, it was a pleasure.
Yes. But I enjoyed everything you showed, and that way of working is the way I would like to work also. And that's to me is the best way to do things. Best way to do things, and appreciate a lot all things you did, and so. And it was a little bit the way we approached our project at that time, but it changed. It changed a lot during the years, and it became richer and richer, I would say. And when one of our oldest ladies decided to write a book and asked us if we could pay the publication, that was a great moment, and we did it. And then she wrote a second one. and that was great, because she was retired, and with a sick man at home, working at home the whole time, her life, doing things she didn't like. And then she decided to write a book about her youth. And then we published that, and it was a great moment. So we are so happy about that. It was more than all the things we did, almost.
Yeah, I don't know. Thank you to both of you for coming here today and also presenting what you do. And I think it's really important that, I mean, both of you also teach, and I think, well, at least from Lucio, I know you also take the students to these places and really try to involve them in these kinds of processes. Amica does so as well. And I think this is really important, and also one of the reasons we wanted to bring you together today. And yeah, I think we touched many topics and had really a good journey through. And I would propose that we leave it here for today and maybe continue some further discussion in future. Then.
Many thanks. This have been really great lectures and very interesting discussion about your important work. And well, I hope now for everybody to expand the horizons and the points of view, and how you can work. And let's say I'm urban planner, and urban planners maybe have also different angles than architects. That is maybe not so material, and this I liked very much. To stress the entrance of the material world to social processes and to cultural processes. And I'm absolutely convinced that with increasing digitalization, this will become even more appealing and even more important. But that's maybe a different discussion for our next time. Would be nice, and many thanks.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for the great questions. That was really fun. Really appreciate the invitation.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, exactly. Thanks to all the students that on Sunday, you prepared the question. Fantastic.
How do you know? Good.
Very good.
Okay, all my best. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Good, Ricarda. Okay, we go ahead tomorrow.